Legend of Total War here, and today I'm going to critique a particular system within Total War that was introduced kind of in its current form from Total War Shogun 2 and has more or less remained unchanged in the past 10 years. And it's a system that is very important and integral to Total War games that I think has become quite stagnant and has actually become a bit of a player trap and is quite detrimental to the early stages of a campaign strategy. So campaign is obviously what I'm focusing on. This has nothing to do with multiplayer. This system is really important and will bleed into other systems, especially in regard to unit variety, because this is a constant discussion that happens around Total War Warhammer specifically. Now, this system isn't necessarily unique to Total War Warhammer. It wasn't introduced in its current form at Total War Warhammer. It's not Total War Warhammer's fault. I'm only using this game as a way to showcase it because it'll be familiar to most of my audience as opposed to other Total War games that they may not be familiar with. But at no point should anyone think that I'm specifically dunking on Total War Warhammer for this, because this system came before it and it has actually persisted after Total War Warhammer as well. It exists within Troy, and I think it exists within Pharaoh. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm fairly sure it does. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about that. So another thing that I want to get into before talking about the actual critique is about online discourse. These kind of conversations, I believe, can be really useful because we can get a consensus on whether or not you guys agree or disagree, and maybe there's a point to all of this that, oh yeah, maybe this system could actually be improved upon and people aren't actually enjoying it based on how it is currently worked, and Creative Assembly can see that and then make adjustments. But they're not going to know that if we don't vocalize it. And the best way to do that is respectfully, for me to have respect for you and for you to have respect for me, but also for you guys to have respect with each other and just talk as civilly as possible. Like, don't need to use ingratiating tones or anything, but if someone disagrees with you, it's totally fine. You can still be friends with that person. I will respect you guys so much if you can take what I've said here and actually argue against it in your own perspective, respectfully, without, using intellectual dishonesty or needing to, twist what I've said just so you can win the argument or something like that. Just talk about it honestly, and this will be a productive conversation. There really should be no reason to think that this is drama in any way. This is just a conversation. I'm not lecturing to you guys. I'm not asking you to boycott anything. I'm not asking you to do anything. All I'd like you to do is, those of you who are interested, please discuss it as honestly and as respectfully as you possibly can. If you're interested in either keeping things the way they are or changing things, make your voices heard. And I'd like to encourage other Total War YouTubers to also make videos on this topic. And if enough people do it and they've got some different opinions, I definitely don't want people to just regurgitate what I've said. I'd like to give those people a shout out so that I can give them a bit of extra light on their channels because they're participating in these conversations. Because one thing that's been happening over the past few years, or I should say hasn't been happening, is that there have been fewer and fewer critiquing of Total War games. And that's not because there aren't critiques to be made, because these games are perfect. But what's been happening from the YouTube side of things, at least, which is coming from my perspective, I can't really speak about it from other types of platforms and mediums, but the reason why there isn't having as many critiques is largely due to the backlash that people will receive from the toxic positivity crowd whenever a slight criticism is made. Like, somebody might say, I think that this coloring scheme is bad, something really mundane like that. And then the toxic positivity crowd will just have a knee-jerk reaction. Well, if you love it so much, don't criticize it. You just love it the way it is. This kind of stupid rhetoric that'll end up happening. And what will end up happening with this is that people get into an absolute frenzy over absolutely nothing and end up misrepresenting the argument and just going on an absolute tirade all across various social medias, spreading misinformation, being intellectually dishonest. So just to make it clear what intellectual dishonesty is when you take something that someone said and intentionally distorted it to the point that they didn't actually say that point, but then you present it to other people as if it was what they said in the first place. This happens all the time. It's very frustrating and very difficult to counter. So the only thing that I can say that would really help if you do see that, because I am anticipating that to happen, is if you see someone being intellectually dishonest, someone that clearly didn't pay attention or is misrepresenting anything that I've said here, is to just call them out and just say, hey, you're being intellectually dishonest. Legend didn't say that. You're twisting what he said. Or, it was nowhere near that severe or anything like that. It really helps to sort of calm things down and just put these people in their place, which is where everyone else should be. Calm down and just have a respectful conversation. There is absolutely no need to lose your shit over it. If you don't like what's being said, just walk away. Because at the end of the day, this is probably not going to make any real difference to the game. But I'd like to see what you guys' opinions are. Alright, so again, with the discourse, just be as respectful as possible. Also, one other thing. I'm fully aware that these kind of videos here have a tendency of getting copy and pasted over to Reddit. Now, I can't stop people from doing that, but I'd like people to be aware of an effect of that will happen. If you are going to want to discuss this on Reddit, my recommendation is to not just link this video, because the Reddit has made it very clear that they don't actually want to discuss YouTube stuff, right? So forget about this YouTube video. If you want to discuss it, then just go and discuss it, and don't even mention my name, because the fact that I'm presenting this argument doesn't matter. The argument will fall or rise based on its own merits. So represent it as you see fit, but leave my name out of it, because people on Reddit get riled up as soon as my name is mentioned, and they usually say things along the lines of, why are we even talking about this guy? Can't we just for 1 second not talk about him? And I agree with them. I should not be being discussed on Reddit. But at the same time, I can't stop you from doing whatever you're going to do. All right, now talking about this particular topic. I'm going to be focusing on limited build slots for Total War games. So every Total War game from Shogun 2 has had limited build slots. Now, in regard to Empire and Napoleon, I believe that it's not necessarily limited build slots, but designated build slots. So, for example, if you got a major settlement, there will be a designated build slot for the Artillery Academy. Designated build slot for the Military Academy, for regular military units. Designated build slot for the entertainment building and for income and taxation, that kind of stuff. And so it's not necessarily restricted build slots, it's just designated ones. So I just want to make that particularly clear. And then, of course, when we go to the first 4 Total War games, Shogun 1, Medieval 1, Rome 1, and Medieval 2, those games have unlimited build slots. The only thing that's restricted is the amount of time required to build them and the number of available buildings that you can potentially construct. So it takes a very long time to build up your cities, as opposed to in these Total War games. Now, like I said, I'm not specifically having a go at Total War Warhammer. This is not the game I think that suffers from this the most. In fact, there is a race within Total War Warhammer that doesn't suffer from this inherent problem really at all. But I'm going to be talking about the Empire here because I think it is one of the factions that kind of does suffer from it a fair bit. It's something that if you're playing on lower campaign difficulties, you can probably ignore it and not really worry about the impact that's going to have on your campaign. But if you're playing on hard, very hard, legendary, there are some things that you need to be taking into consideration, how this could be a bit of a player trap, and you can end up setting yourself up for a poor start to your campaign, because the way that it is intuitively trying to tell you the way to play the game is actually really suboptimal, and that's really unfortunate, because I'd really like it if the way that is intuitive for people to play the game actually be the optimal way to go about it, and it's simply a case of that good players will be able to utilize more of these mechanics better than, say, people who are inexperienced of the game, rather than experienced players understanding that you need to avoid certain mechanics and end up diluting the experience by avoidant gameplay, essentially, which is currently how I play Total War Warhammer. I avoid a lot of the player traps, which is unfortunate. I would prefer that these systems be reworked so that I would engage with more of these systems, especially when it comes to unit variety. And that is the big factor, I think, in regard to where the limited build slots really let people down. And there's actually a really simple solution to it, in my opinion. So let's talk about Altdorf first, and also Karl Franz here. On turn 1, this is vanilla campaign. So if we have a look at Karl Franz, he starts off with this army here. It's got some variety in it. I imagine that most people are pretty happy with this starting army. There's actually nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Now, if I have a look at what's available to recruit here, I'm going to pose a question to you guys, and I want you to answer honestly. You don't have to post it in the comments, just, keep it in your head. I'm going to ask you a question. How many different units are there available to recruit? Is the answer 4? Is it 3? Is it 2? Is it 1? If you answered 4, you're actually incorrect. The answer is 2. There are 2 different units available here. There is an archer unit and there is a melee infantry unit. Because, I know I'm going to get some pushback on this, but you just got to hear me out. See, these units here, the differences in their stats are trivial. Because while these units here have higher stats, they also have higher upkeep cost. And what's important is utility and value. Okay, so the utility of all 3 of these units is identical. They're line holders. They're not there to dish out damage. The units that you're going to be facing in the early stage of the campaign are probably not going to be a lot of cavalry. So the fact that these have bonus versus large at the moment, or the fact that they've got shields, while that is a bonus for sure, it is compensated by their increased upkeep cost. Now, here's the thing. These 2 units here require a military barracks, so they actually have an additional, like, hidden cost on top of that. And so these units here, and I've expressed this in my tier list, are actually lower value than the spearmen here. Now, in regard to value, let me just elaborate a little bit more on this. Because these units don't exist within a vacuum. They have to interact with other systems in the game, namely your economy. So at the beginning of a campaign, you do not have unlimited funds. Later on in the campaign, the amount that these cost is irrelevant, right? You know, once you've got like 100 regions, that doesn't matter. But right now, it actually matters quite a bit. So we can see here, we've got 1,771 income. It is ideal not to run yourself into the red in the early stages of the campaign. It will happen with some factions, but with the Empire, it's best if you don't do that. Now, here's the thing. In a game that doesn't really limit the number of units you can recruit, obviously you can put 20 units in any given army, and you might think, well, I want to put the best units I possibly can in this army, so I'm going to recruit the most expensive one in here and just spam that in there as much as I can, right? Now, here's the thing to consider. Your upkeep cost definitely does matter, and there's a pretty big difference between the swordsman unit and the upkeep unit, especially considering they're all tier 1 units. They're all considered tier 1, right? Now, there is nothing stopping you from recruiting a second army. And in most cases, it is actually strategically better for the player to have 2 weaker armies as opposed to 1 slightly stronger army. Because this unit here is slightly stronger than this one, basically relative to the amount of upkeep. So you could get, I don't know, for that amount of money, actually, let me just get a calculator out. So if we had 1771, divide that by 88. Oh, sorry, that's for that one. Sorry, go divide it by 1771 divided by 81. Sorry, you could recruit 21.864 units before you have absolutely no funds left. Of course, you would improve your economy with various constructions, which we'll get into that in a fair bit. So that's how many units you can recruit. Now, if I was to recruit, say, swordsmen with that same amount of income, so I go 1771 divided by 100. Okay, you could recruit 17.71 units. So if I had 17.71 swordsmen go up against, what was it, 21 units of spearmen, for the most part, it would be a complete wash. It would basically end up in a tie in terms of overall value. And so if these units here have the exact identical value as this one here, then why even build this building in the first place, especially considering you have other options? So the fact that the game has built this for you at the start has set you up to fail a little bit, just a little bit. It's not like it's a big deal. It's not like this is a catastrophic problem. But the thing is, at tier 1, where you've got limited build slots, you've got the ability to upgrade to the next level. That'll take time. You don't have time to wait. You need to get moving straight away, because in Total War Warhammer specifically, the AI doesn't dilly-dally, especially in the higher difficulties. You're most likely going to be dealing with full stacks, if not more, as soon as possible. And I also want to touch back on the advantages of having multiple armies over one single stronger army. So, if we have a look at the buildings that are available at tier 1, okay, so we get rid of this one here, just demolish it, so that gives us back, was it 600? Doesn't matter. Demolish it, so it'll be available next turn to build something else. So if we were to build this one here, the maximum value of that one at the moment would be about 300 gold per turn, assuming you sell all of the kilns of pottery, kilnfuls. If you build this one over here, its maximum value, or minimum value, I guess, it depends on other multipliers, is 250 extra gold. So that adds extra gold here. And while these units here will be removed from your availability, instead of having, let's have a look at this. So what was it? With 1771 divided by 81, we had 21.8 spearmen. So when we've instead got 1771 plus, let's just say I built the basic building at 250, okay, our income then goes up to 2021. And if we divide that by 81, suddenly we can afford 24.95 units. So we went from having 17 of these units to having 24 of these, and suddenly the scale has tipped in favor of the spearmen, and that's just at tier 1. So as you continue to conquer these settlements, no longer having this barracks, let's say you capture the next settlement. Another problem here is that it only maxes out at tier 3, so you really should be building this in a minor settlement. Another reason why they set up sort of a trap here. Now, when you capture this settlement here, you could think to yourself, okay, I've just captured a new settlement, I'll put the barracks in here. But what are some of the other options? You've got this building here, and if you have a look at what it provides income generated 100, growth plus 30, casualty replenishment rate plus 4%, recruitment cost minus 20% for pistolers and outriders units, right? Now, what is that going to provide in terms of value? Specifically the growth, not even referring to the income, you can basically halve the amount of time that it's going to take to grow this province, allowing you to advance your civilization further, or your country a lot further. So again, once you've captured your first settlement, you're still not incentivized to build a barracks. Now, what happens when you get to tier 2? So let's just say, okay, I built this one in this slot here. We're at tier 2 now. We have 2 additional slots. Well, we've got this building here, which can give us, again, a maximum of 300 gold, depending on your trade agreements. And you've also got this one over here, which can, again, further your growth rate. Now, of course, you might be absolutely desperate for some new units at this point here, because you're using just basic crap. That's fair enough. And you would be... I could definitely see a reasoning for building this structure here, given that this is where you're going to get your first availability of cavalry, adding to the level of variety that you'll have in your army. But also, by the time that you get to tier 3, you've already recruited probably 3 lots of 2 recruits. You've already recruited 6 additional units. So the amount of slots left in your army is actually only 5, because you already filled this up. And typically speaking, it is not efficient to disband a unit to replace it with a slightly better one. You usually want to maybe skip a couple of tiers, unless you're really desperate to do that. It's just not efficient to do that kind of thing, that's all. Again, you don't have to do it that way. So let's just say you start building variety then at tier 2, which usually isn't even where I go in, because I usually skip it at that point there as well. I wait until tier 3. So we get to tier 3, and even at tier 2, you've got other buildings available that are mostly military stuff. But at tier 3, you'll open up another 2 build slots, and that's where you're really going to have a lot of justification for building this stuff. But here's the thing, by the time I get Altdorf to tier 3, I'm probably already conquered the entire province, and my army has moved out. And so, any units that are recruitable from here will have to be recruited in global, which takes time. And it's usually better to be significantly more aggressive, even if that means using lower tier units. So again, this is just part of the overall strategy with Total War Warhammer, because it is not good to sit on your hands and knees and do nothing. You want to be as aggressive as possible, especially against your early game enemies, because they can recruit way faster than you, and they can have potentially more units than you. Because if we have a look at the breakdown of income here, see that income there where it says background income plus 3,000? Regardless of what difficulty you're playing on, the background income of pretty much every single faction is going to be higher than yours. So if they've got the same number of settlements than you, or even fewer settlements, they might be able to simply outspend you, especially considering they usually have reduced upkeep costs. Again, this is more in regard to higher difficulties. So where you might only be able to afford 1 army, because you put variety in the armies, you put loads of military barracks in there, Vlad might start showing up with 4 full stacks just because he gets 50% off and he's already conquered half of Stirland or whatever. And so you find yourself at a massive disadvantage just because you're massively outnumbered against this zombie swarm. You know, quantity is a quality of its own. And the thing is, the economic buildings here provide such an instant and significant amount of income that it's really hard to snub your nose at the economic buildings, especially considering most of the buildings in this province will actually have 2 economic buildings. Like this one over here has got a landmark in it. This one here, this settlement, you could probably justify building the military barracks at tier 2 because it's only got 1 economic building, and that's assuming you don't want to build the growth building there, right? Now, all of this causes a disincentivization for putting variety in your army in the earlier stages of the campaign, because of basic unit requirements for these units here. Now, I'm going to now point out a game that essentially has this issue solved, and it's Medieval 2. So with Medieval 2, the unit variety issue is completely just not an issue, right? Because if we open up Nottingham here, for example, this is turn 1 on an England campaign, with basic as shit settlement, right? Just a castle with a mustering hall. We've got access to a basic military infantry. So this is basically the equivalent of a spearman without shields, right? Well, not really. I guess we could get that from over here. So you've got units that are recruited from different provinces. You've got different utility in different provinces, right? But you've already got access to your cavalry by default. Now, even if this castle was lower tier, so if we go to Mott and Bailey, how do we do that? Hang on, how are we going to do that? If I go to this, whatever the case is, I just for some reason can't seem to click on that. Just won't let me. You'll still have availability of some of these basic units. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here is that at the very beginning of the campaign, regardless of what you've built, you have a baseline level of basic units and a decent amount of variety just built in at the very beginning. And this is in a Total War game that was 20 years old, or nearly 20 years old. It's actually 18 years old, whatever. And you've got more variety at the start of this campaign than you do in Total War Warhammer, a game that is famed for its unit variety. But on top of that as well, you might notice, well, you don't have missile units there, Legend, nothing recruitable. Yeah, you're right. And so it's got an additional layer on top of that where you've got access to mercenaries. Now, that's something that Total War Warhammer doesn't have yet, but may be introduced in the future, where that's where you could potentially get your unit variety from. And this is a sort of a mid-tier unit. It's available straight at the start, and the downside is it simply costs a lot of money. Now, in regard to Medieval 2, as an example, the incentivization towards building economic versus military is actually more skewed towards military than it is towards economic. If we have a look at this, if we build the land clearance as an example, we can see here that the income goes up by about 50 and it's a small amount of population growth. Now, in the settlement of London, which is a non-castle region, it's a regular city, it is probably better to focus on economy in these regions. But in regard to a castle, right, you do want to have some population growth going. But if I was to build the dirt roads, it doesn't really provide much value right now. If I was to build the port settlement, it doesn't really provide much value. And the reason for that is that this building here is a multiplier based on population and based on other factors like trade agreements and stuff. It's not based on a base income. And so we're not going to get 250 extra income per turn by instantly building this. It takes a long time before the port actually really starts making money, which means there's a fair bit of justification for building additional military buildings, because if you don't do that, you're simply going to run out of capacity for them. And so the player is incentivized to not only vary their armies, but also vary their construction, as opposed to building cookie cutter settlements with Total War Warhammer. It's not even unique to Total War Warhammer. It's basically any Total War game, really, in the past, 10 years. And so most of these settlements here, apart from the one that will have unique buildings, will basically be built identically because of the absolute need of getting that instant economic boost, just so that you can recruit more units, because there's no unit caps on them. Now, there are some factions in the game that have unit caps. Now, in the case of the Tomb Kings, for example, you're still probably going to end up with mostly spamming out skeleton spears and skeleton swordsmen, simply because building those military buildings is expensive. They have got a very low income. And it's definitely a better system than what they've currently got for the Empire for this particular issue. But still, most of your armies will be mostly made up of skelly crap. And the same sort of thing with the Beastmen as well. While they do have unit caps, because they utilize the resource Dread, and you basically spend a lot of different things on Dread. Building up your unit caps via Dread is one of the lowest value ways to spend it up. You get a lot more value by increasing the number of armies that you can produce, and also by upgrading the hordes as soon as they're recruited, and also by improving your herdstones, and also by confederating other factions. So you've got a lot of other priorities that provide a lot of value. I mean, you can still increase the unit caps if you want, but there are things that provide higher value earlier on. And so what will end up happening in an optimal situation is that you'll end up with quite a lot of armies that might have a few a few bits of variety, but for the most part will be made up of Ongor Raiders, if you're playing efficiently, because that's a unit that doesn't have unit caps. Now, there is a faction in Total War Warhammer 3 that absolutely has got this system completely nailed. Variety is not only enforced, encouraged, but is optimal to do so. And that is the Warriors of Chaos, because their units that are available is not tied to construction, or not entirely tied to construction. It's tied to just the region that they're in. They don't even have to own the region. They show up in a region, and whatever units are available there, well, you just have to make do. You cannot just spam 5 stacks of Marauder armies right from the get-go. You need to move your army into different regions and just see what's available there. You might find a few trolls, you might find a manticore, you might find a giant. And different units will have different conditions for showing up, and you just cannot spam one unit type. And the thing is as well, is that even though you're recruiting a weak unit, like say Marauders, those Marauders can be upgraded over time as they gain experience. So you don't have to disband them, they just get better. And so variety is not only encouraged and enforced, it's actually very much beneficial for the player to really utilize everything that's available to them. Now, one thing that I forgot to go back to is the benefit of having 2 armies as opposed to 1. So if you've got 2... Oops, excuse me. A little rattle there that I touched. Anyway, if you've got 2 armies instead of 1, you've actually got more strategic options on the campaign map. So for example, you could put your stronger army in ambush stance and leave your other army visible to entice the enemy force to come towards you and basically get caught into an ambush. And it can make a stronger force that you have entice a weaker force to actually make that attack and catch them in an ambush. It also allows you to besiege besiege a settlement with one army and then attack a reinforcing army that's not sitting inside the settlement with the other, and either push it away or isolate it from its reinforcements. So having just one army roll around as a doom stack is not optimal in Total War Warhammer 3 whatsoever. And so variety is also not optimal. And this is why in most of the campaigns that you've seen me play, you'll see me, especially with Kislev, you'll see me roll around with just a lot of Kossars. And it's not necessarily because I don't like variety in my armies. It's because it's suboptimal, especially in the early stages of the campaign. What you'll usually find with me is that as I play super late in the campaign, which is usually by the point I've stopped live streaming it, I actually start building a lot of variety of armies. It's just that it takes a long time to get to that point. The fun point is really much later on, and the beginning is this chore that you just need to get through in order to get to that point. Because as you unlock more build slots, you then get a lot more player agency, a lot more options, because there's only so many economic buildings that you can produce, and after a while, then you can only recruit military buildings, additional military buildings, and so you're incentivized then to get them. Now, I'm going to offer some solutions to this problem. So specific to the Empire, this is what I would recommend to solve this issue of suboptimal military buildings in the early stage of the campaign. And that is, at tier 0, to provide one of many unit types available without requiring a military barracks. Get rid of this building here entirely. Keep it, basically start it at tier 2. Put the, maybe put the pikemen, sorry, not pikemen, the spearmen up here. Put the swordsmen available at tier 1. I would have the pistoliers available at this building. Same thing with the Free Company Militia. So that would allow for essentially 5 different units available at the very beginning without requiring a military barracks, and just get rid of both of these buildings here at tier 1. Make them available starting at tier 2. And what this would do is allow the players that want to be using variety in their armies to actually have a reason to do so. I mean, you still have to pay upkeep for these units. That is significantly more expensive than, say, an archer unit. So you have to take that into consideration when recruiting it. But it's not going to consume a build slot that is way better placed for like an economic building. It's just so hard to justify building this first compared to this or this one here. And if you do this with pretty much all factions, provide options at the very beginning, you're kind of going back to a Medieval 2 style to some degree, where the player has those options right from the get-go, where you've got the melee infantry, you've got the cavalry, and you've got the missile units immediately right off the bat without even having to construct anything, without having to wait. and having to sit there waiting for, you know, an army that they feel a bit more comfortable with. And it's not going to provide any detriment in doing that in the campaign, whereas currently is detrimental to have this building here early. So that would be my solution to it. Again, this is something that the Warriors of Chaos have basically at the start. They've got their variety at the beginning. You've got access to cavalry. Marauder horsemen are bloody everywhere. You've got doggos everywhere. You've got trolls everywhere. You've got manticores, giants, all of these, you know, so much variety available right from the get-go, right from like turn 5, as soon as you move into Norska in most places. There's just so many units available, and you're only limited based on the limit of your budget and the units, the number of units that are available, not the variety of those units. And so I think it is really important to encourage people and incentivize people to actually use the entire roster, and there's got to be some incentive to do so, especially when playing on the higher difficulties. And this is where the limited build slots really restrict the player from being able to justify that on a optimal level of gameplay, which is why I think that this is a suboptimal system, which could easily have a workaround from it. The other option is simply just get rid of some of the limits on these constructions in the early stages of the campaign. Rather than having 3 slots here at tier 1, have all the slots available, right? And simply make it so that certain units unlock, certain buildings or levels of buildings unlock as you progress up the settlement chain. Because what does it matter if you build all of these buildings here at tier 1? It's not really going to provide that much extra value to the settlement, but it will give the player options in terms of what they want to do. As opposed to this building here is obviously optimal and everything else should be forgotten. Anyway, that's my point of view in regard to the restricted build slots and how it creates a restricted early stage of the campaign, which at the early stage of the campaign, because I've been playing some other strategy games lately, and things open up way quicker than they do in Total War Warhammer. So, for example, with Age of Wonders 4, you know, you've got availability straight away of variety, because it's not tied to your the buildings that you've already constructed. It's tied to the level of your settlement. So you've got available archers, you've got available like battle wizards and melee infantry, low tier stuff, but it's available directly at the start of the game. You've got scouts available right at the start, and so the variety is there available to you. All you have to do is pay the money to get it. You don't have to unlock these additional units. New units will be unlocked as you progress through the game, and they'll just simply be higher tier units of it. And so I think that system is significantly better. And do you know what the funny thing with Age of Wonders 4, and I get there's not a Total War game, there's no limit on the amount of buildings each city can have. You can build an unlimited number. It's simply a matter of time and resources. And so it's this weird system with Total War where they've got these arbitrary restrictions on these build slots, which I think people have been arguing against for a really long time, but the arguments have mostly been forgotten because it's fallen on deaf ears. Anyway, that's the end of this video here. I've made my argument to the best of my ability. Let me know in the comments below whether you agree or disagree, whether you think I'm just being, you know, freaking cheese brain hard. It's totally cool. Just let me know what you think, whether you think I'm onto something here or whether I'm completely off base, or basically that I should just play variety anyway and don't worry about economy, or don't worry about having that super strong start. You know, let me know what you think in the comments below. I appreciate you. As long as you're responding in an honest way and not taking what I say out of context. I don't think I've said anything here that should upset anyone, because ultimately it's not a deal breaker with this. I still play the game. But, you know, I bypass the system because I don't think it is very good. And I start to play the game as it's a bit more intended, not entirely, as we get into the later stage of the campaign, where the issue of limited build slots falls off, because I think it's just a bad system. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Let me know in the comments. Get a discussion going. Hope other YouTubers decide to take this up. You know, if anyone decides to use intellectual dishonesty, please shout that down, because it's unwelcome and it poisons the well. Let's have a good discussion going, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.